Good morning and welcome to today's webcast, Subsurface Optimization, the next step in your digital journey. I'm Craig Fleming, Technical Editor of World Oil, and I'll be your moderator today. In today's webcast, you'll learn how other companies have created immediate and substantial impact without adding cultural, organizational, or technical implementation complexities inherent in surface digital solutions. Joining us for today's event are Hugh de Saint-Germain, Chairman and Founder of FOROIL, and Scott Sanderson, Principal from Deloitte Consulting LLP. In addition to his responsibilities at FOROIL, Hugh is the Chairman of MoMA, a group of companies specializing in data analytics, high-performance computing, real-time monitoring, machine learning, and 3D imaging applied to various sectors including nuclear, oil and gas, and utilities. Hugh started his career in the United States at Vissay Incorporated before joining the French Ministry of Industry and implemented programs to Schmie development in the Rhone-Alpes region. He was head of the Exploration Production Service within the Petroleum Directorate. He was also head of the Corporate Finance Division at French Securities and Exchange Commission. As Soltranche's Executive Vice President of Asia, he redefined strategy, developed new technologies, and re-engineered the company's operations. He was appointed French Trade Advisor and served on the French Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. He is a member of the Corps des Mines and currently serves as a board member of Bull SA. He graduated from École Polytechnique, École des Mines de Paris, and earned a degree in international finance from New York State University, as well as an MBA in corporate finance from Paris Dauphine University. Scott is a principal in Deloitte Consulting Oil and Gas Strategy and Operations Practice. He has more than 25 years of experience helping oil and gas companies define and execute strategies and operational improvements across a variety of sectors. Notable experience includes M&A strategy, execution and post-merger integration, portfolio optimization, designing new service offerings, organization design and renewal, brand value analysis, and shareholder value-based management. Scott has led hundreds of projects for large regional oil companies, global integrated major oil companies, NOCs, and oil field service providers. Scott earned a Bachelor of Science in Nuclear Engineering from Northwestern University, an MBA in Finance and Economics from the Kellogg Graduate School of Management at Northwestern, and a FINRA Series 79 investment banking license. Before we get started, let's review some general housekeeping notes. Following the presentation, we'll have a short question and answer session. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during the presentation. Just type your question into the Q&A box located on the bottom left corner of your screen, then click the Submit button. You may enlarge the slide window at any time by clicking on the box button on the top right corner of the slide area. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. If you're experiencing problems with the program, please press F5 on your keyboard to refresh the presentation. You can also visit the Webcast Help Guide by clicking on the Help button below the slide window. Now let's get started with the first presentation. Scott?
Okay, thank you, Craig, and thank you everyone for joining. We'll start today's meeting with a quick safety moment as we start most of our meetings. We're coming into the summer months, obviously, and it may seem that we should all be aware of the effects of temperature and heat in our daily routines. In fact, Hugh and I were in South Asia last week. It was well into the 40s or north of 100 Fahrenheit where we were at. It was very obvious that we needed to take precautions. So everyone, please be careful, stay hydrated. Most importantly, if you begin to feel the effects of heat exhaustion, safely stop what you're doing, cool off, and take some fluids. keeping us safe is a top priority for all of us in this industry that we care so much about, so let's never forget that. Okay? So I'm fancy myself as an oil person, and actually just a very, very simple one at that. And so I'm always focused on just four things. How do we help our clients make more oil for less dollars, faster, and with less risk? Again, that may sound overly simple, but the business model for our whole industry in the upstream can be summarized by those four things. And we at Deloitte are constantly trying to find new and different ways to do this. And so is the industry. The industry continues to innovate to find ways to leverage emerging technologies wherever it can. We are leading efforts all over the globe and are very pleased to be partnering with UG and with FOROIL on this endeavor. And as we'll see in a few moments, FOROIL's technology creates a unique opportunity for oil companies to do all four of these things. The approach is patented. It has been proven around the world. The technology works on onshore, offshore, and pretty much any brownfield conventional asset. And we're very pleased to be joined with them today. So, a few important just characteristics of the technology to set up first. First, the technology itself is quick to set up, it's quick to run, and it's quick to update. It requires virtually no new infrastructure, no new data, only runs on data that you already have. The entire model building and optimization process takes only 3 to 4 months to run and can be updated routinely. The output, or what you get as a client, is a set of field development plans that are truly optimized, or at least optimized over 15 million plans run. And these optimized plans uncover opportunities for increased production, either with CapEx or without CapEx. In the event of a capital plan, there's an additional and significant benefit of de-risking that capital plan, improving the output of that capital plan, providing you optionality with staging your capital based on changing conditions, and you will speak about a case study on that a little bit later. The technique is not really designed to replace your existing tools or techniques or expertise. It's designed to complement them. In the end, in addition to optimized field development plans, you will ultimately have a better understanding of your reservoir and the ability to feed alternative new plans into your own model if you wish. Uncertainties in your reservoir model may well be clarified. In several of our discussions with clients, we've seen technical teams reluctantly admit that over the years, they may have become a little lost on their more complex assets, and the thought of rebuilding the model from scratch is fairly daunting. FOROIL, in the matter of a handful of months, can help clarify some of these uncertainties. And finally, the breakthrough technology actually creates accurate and very robust forecasts that can then be put into budgets and or staged over time. Okay. So we would like to get you involved early here with a polling question. When it comes to digital technologies and digital maturity, where do you think the oil and gas industry stands relative to other industries? And when we're speaking about digital maturity, we're generally referring to the latest wave of technologies, things like Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, machine learning, that are now being industrialized and commercialized around the world. Not just simply tools that are zeros and ones. So that's what we mean by digital. So let's take a moment and have you give us your response to oil and gas industry's digital maturity. Do we lead most other industries? Are we lagging most industries? Or are we about the same? We'll take some time for you to respond. And I hope that didn't sound like a leading question given the context of the rest of today's discussion. And it looks like we've got most of them submitted, so maybe we can advance to your responses. And not surprisingly, nearly 3/4 of you believe that our industry lags behind other industries. Roughly a quarter say about the same, and only a small handful say we're leading other industries. I think that definitely reflects what the industry research is saying. If we go to the next slide. For those of you who feel like we're lagging other industries, the research shows that you're largely correct. When I first saw this analysis, I have to say I did think it was a little unfair, because it seems to imply that our industry does not really innovate or use technology, which is clearly not the case. I mean, our industry innovates with things like 3D imaging and deep water development, and certainly hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling. Those are all very interesting innovations, but they aren't the same kind of business model innovations that we often talk about when we refer to digital. So it is true, and you just validated it, that while the oil and gas industry is known for its many technical innovations, it has pretty clearly lagged in the adoption of the current wave of digital technologies. There is, however, a sense of urgency that we have seen around the world in trying to catch up and adopt some of these technologies over the past 6 to 12 months, maybe even 18 months. In fact, in January, Eni just completed a new supercomputer that's the size of a football pitch to scan oil and gas reservoirs, and that ranks as one of the top 10 most powerful computers in the world. ExxonMobil, of course, has done something similar that they announced just earlier in this year. So with operators moving quickly in all directions to implement digital, the critical question becomes how to catch up, using what technologies, and delivering what solutions. So a lot of the digital activities over the last several months and even years have focused mostly on surface equipment and rotating equipment and those sorts of things. The applicability of our digital technologies to subsurface has been, relatively speaking, limited, and we certainly notice that with our upstream clients. A relatively substantial disconnect between the language of digital teams who talk about artificial intelligence or Internet of Things or big data and analytics with the language of the petrotechnical team who want to address the reservoir and who talk about geology and structure and trap and seal and so forth. So we need to find a way to create solutions that bridge the gap between the language of digital and the language of digital technologies and the language of reservoir engineering and petroleum engineering, because we believe that the biggest asset of the oil companies is actually the reservoir and not necessarily the surface equipment that operates day to day. So there has been significant progress that's been made, but meaningful applications to a full-blown reservoir and to apply to full-blown reservoir dynamics has been limited. This is actually where FOROIL focused their expertise and developed just that breakthrough, because they have married machine learning with reservoir physics and well physics, advanced mathematics, and developed a forecast model that, for conventional brownfields, demonstrates a remarkable forecast accuracy. And it's important to note that FOROIL's solution is truly a reservoir-wide solution with it's a long-term strategic tool to be used, not simply focused on daily well production, well by well. It's a strategic tool that applies across the entire reservoir asset. Okay, now I'll pass it to Hugh for a quick introduction on FOROIL. Hugh, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Scott. So a few words about our company. We started 15 years ago developing solutions for the nuclear industry. Basically, what we've been doing for the past 15 years is to take as an input to our systems data, and we run those systems on 10,000 computers in parallel. So we are talking about high-performance computing. And we apply machine learning and algorithms, but we embed in our systems all the physical equations that we all know in the given subject. So for nuclear physics, we're talking about the nuclear physics equations. And for reservoir engineering, we are talking about the same equations as we are dealing with in the reservoir model. So this system has been in place and in the market for 15 years on nuclear systems, and we started 10 years ago with oil and gas. And we started marketing it clearly more aggressively 6 months ago with Deloitte. I'll come back to the technology later on. I pass the floor again back to Scott.
Okay. Thank you, Hugues. So the landscape is littered today with tools that employ fuzzy logic or neural networks or statistical methods and other analytic tools, but do not embed the reservoir physics that is core to the FOROIL technology, as Hugues just mentioned. Ultimately, we believe that those technologies will not be able to create forecast accuracy as FOROIL does, as they rely more on the data and the statistics and sometimes ignore or do not treat the reservoir physics as core and fundamental to their models. So if you don't have those equations of reservoir physics, and if you don't have the understanding of the dynamics that govern behavior, your ability to forecast future production is going to be very limited. So it's important to note that digital oil recovery has reservoir physics at its foundation. So FOROIL then applies machine learning to that data set and to the reservoir physics. And machine learning in this application is more than just training a model on a historical data set. It's using the rigor of learning theory to generate a model that is mathematically sound and can minimize your forecasting error. It's a critical point. Massive parallel computing is employed then to run 15 million optimization scenarios overnight. Those are fully calculated scenarios to identify the best plan based on the client's objectives. The outputs, and we'll talk about a few case studies here in a moment, is that in 3 to 4 months, production and reserve increases are substantial, 20-ish% without CapEx, and substantially more if you are deploying CapEx in your field. The forecast accuracy is substantially better than your typical mesh models can deliver over time. And the field development plans that are run take into account any client-specified constraints. So it marries the reservoir behavior with surface constraints, water handling constraints, individual well constraints, or even financial constraints or limitations that the client has. So it integrates both the subsurface dynamics with the real world of engineering and financial constraints. Plans can be updated rapidly when conditions change, price of oil changes, the cost of services change. That could change your optimization. That can be done very, very quickly. In short, digital oil recovery helps you find more oil for less dollars, faster, and with less risk. Okay, now we'll get into a little bit of detail on how it's different. So bear with me for a moment, but reservoir models will typically define what the reservoir is. What are the rock properties? What is the structure? Where are there faulting? Where is there trap? And so forth. By contrast, a behavioral model seeks to understand causes and effects. It seeks to understand how the reservoir behaves, what it does. And where there is sufficient historical data available, this data can yield insights into how the reservoir responds to various changes. Changes created by new wells, changes created by recompletions, changes to water injection, well shut-ins, things of that nature. Over 10, 15, 20 years, many, many activities have occurred in the field, and the field has responded to each one of those. We learn those responses and learn then how the reservoir behaves. So for the behavioral model to yield meaningful results, it's critical that it's built with the reservoir physics, because the only reason it can work is because the equations of reservoir physics work. Otherwise, it would just be a statistical correlation which will fall apart over several months of forecasting. So it works precisely because those laws work. We'll go into this a little bit later as well, but because the technique learns from past data, it's only applicable to conventional brownfields that have 10 years or so of production history. If we only have 4 or 5 years, there's insufficient data for the machine to learn that behavior. And as we said earlier, it doesn't replace reservoir modeling, especially for greenfields or step-outs or new developments, but we use it as a supplement to and a way to accelerate traditional modeling and forecasting techniques. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about the workflow and how does digital oil recovery compare to the more traditional workflow. We said initially that we can put together the entire model and the optimization and the field development plans in 3 to 4 months. Here's how it could work. So first of all, instead of starting with interpreted data like seismic and well logs, it actually starts with the production history itself, as well as other measured data that you have in the field. So we would take on board all the measured data that you have, and instead of building the geological model, we start training our model with that data set. What FOROIL does is build a space of solutions or potential solutions. Sometimes we call them candidate models using its patented technique. It then uses the machine learning to tune up the model parameters, running the data through all the candidate models to find the one then that gives us the best match of history in that space of solutions. So now we've essentially built from our space of candidate models the best model, and we can run that model with 15 million different scenarios, different development scenarios, to find the one that optimizes your objectives. Because the machine learns so rapidly, and because the parallel computing allows such a rapid optimization of the plans, the entire process runs only 3 to 4 months to complete. By contrast, building your geological model and then your reservoir model and your history matching process in the traditional sense is very time consuming, and ultimately, while we may generate many models, only a handful of plans are practical to test. And this is why we think for conventional brownfields, the FOROIL workflow is often used and best used to supplement an already developed traditional program. I'll take a slide here to describe kind of how this forecasting method is, how it works and why it's different. 2 primary issues. First of all, traditional models use data that are interpreted. Seismic is the best example of that. These data will always be subject to some sort of bias and some error, hence the word interpreted. The FOROIL model will only use measured data, well tests, production data, core data, things of that nature. And of course, these data may still be subject to some measurement error, but they are much less subject to interpretation errors or biases. And the second and perhaps more important issue or interesting issue is that in seeking to understand the reservoir better, reservoir engineers often make models that are more and more complex, more and more granular, and try to get more and more precise. That leads to a better understanding of the rock and a better understanding of the reservoir, but it also leads to a situation where we have too many variables with too little data to actually test and match to that model. It gives rise to the well-known issue of non-uniqueness in reservoir engineering. If the models themselves are undetermined, we end up with a near infinite number of solutions that can match history, and therefore the forecast error really suffers. FOROIL models, on the other hand, do not attempt to get to such a granular level. They actually try to build the model based on that measured data set so that the complexity of the model is only as complex as the size of data sets, the data set that you have. So again, FOROIL starts with the measured data, things such as production and injection rates, and then it combines that data with the equations of reservoir physics and scales the behavioral model so that it can create a more precise and accurate forecast. Again, keep in mind that this only applies to brownfield where we have sufficient data to learn from. The machine learning technology itself, despite what you might think or what it might sound like, is actually not new. It was demonstrated in the 70s and developed through the 70s and 80s by a couple of famous Russian mathematicians, but it's only now that we have the complexity of the data sets and the sufficient data and sufficient computing power to actually leverage them on a commercial scale. And that's what Hugh was talking about when they first started doing this in nuclear, and now we're doing it in the oil and gas industry. And what has been demonstrated by this technique is that forecast error is actually inversely related to the complexity of the model. And so building the model in FOROIL's patented approach takes advantage of this fact. It builds the behavioral model with a complexity level that matches the amount of data available. Okay? So whereas other digital technologies attempt to model reservoir-wide might rely on things like fuzzy logic or neural networks or mass correlations, other big data techniques will not be able to generate the forecast accuracy that FOROIL can deliver. Okay? So it is difficult for traditional models, due to their immense size and complexity, to perform a rigorous optimization. That is also a complicated mathematical problem. The models themselves may take several hours or days to run new plans, and thus only 10 to 15 development plans may be tested and before one is chosen to be implemented. So also required is the expertise and knowledge of the reservoir engineering team. So the field development plans that are ultimately employed are the plans that are generated by the individual professionals and then tested against the model. FOROIL, on the other hand, uses massive parallel computing and advanced optimization techniques to generate and fully calculate 15 million different field development plans against the model, scanning that space to find the optimal development plan. And so the result is a plan that provides robust forecasts, accurate forecasts, and optimizes the field for the operator's stated objectives. Okay. So that's the end of the sort of technical exposition on it. I'd like to get you involved again and ask the participants what you think the biggest issue is that you experience with creating current reservoir models. Is it the time it takes? Is it the forecast uncertainty? Is it the ability to clarify unknowns, or all of the above? And we'll give you a few minutes or moments. Okay. What does it look like, Adam? Okay, so it looks like maybe the question was a little leading because it's all of the above, which is probably what we would have expected. Ability to clarify unknowns. That's actually good to hear because it sort of acknowledges the fact that these unknowns exist, and we've spoken to several petrotechnical teams, and it takes a little bit of time to bring them up to speed on the technology and also where we can help bridge gaps on clarifying these unknowns. And it's good to see that's been acknowledged here by this group. Those are a good set of answers in addition to all of the above. Okay. Go ahead, Adam. So I think we have a couple of case studies that really demonstrate the results, and I'll turn it over to you to discuss a couple of them.
Well, thank you, Scott. The first case I'm going to comment is a case published by the operator, whose name is Ecopetrol, National Oil Company of Colombia. And this is a case which is published on a SPE paper. So you can find the references of those papers. There are actually 2 papers on our website. This is a field where the water cut when we came in was already 97%. And this is a field where it is under secondary recovery with roughly 150 wells, a large number of injectors and producers, of course. On that case, the client was not happy with his previous drilling campaigns when the cost of additional barrels developed was around $25, and they were looking for a solution to make the best of the existing setup of wells. And so we run our solution, which shows incidentally why 15 million cases is interesting. So the levers we had in this case were different things. The first thing was we were allowed to convert existing producers into injectors. The second lever we had was to modify injection rates and production rates of every single well. The purpose of the exercise was to find a way to better produce the field, therefore hopefully produce more oil and increase the reserves. So we took all the data, as Scott has explained, all the production data, injection data, pressure measurements, geological measurements, all the data available on the field, and we run those 15 million scenarios in order to find the best way to produce the field. And the result is represented on the graph that you have on the right-hand side of the slide. We told them to convert 7 wells, existing producers, into injectors, 7 out of 70 wells. So the combination of that was huge. 7 was not a given, so we could have decided to convert 5 wells or 3 wells or 15 wells, which as such creates a lot of scenarios. And then on top of that, we told them to inject more water on some wells and less water on other wells. On this picture, the blue wells are the ones where we told them to inject more water. And the red ones are the ones where we told them to inject less water. And the result is almost visible. You can visually see that the circulation of water within the reservoir has been modified. Hence, the production has been improved. And hence, the reserves have increased. In this particular case, what you see on the left-hand side of the graph are the actual figures, so the actual increase of production. The green bars represent the increase on a monthly basis. And roughly speaking, the increase is 22% above the business as usual case, which was used by the client as a reference. So to sum up, with no investment at all, no drilling cost, modifying rates and converting wells, so almost no cost, we increased by 22% both production and reserves on that field. The reserves have been recertified by De Gaulier McNaughton, and the client was obviously happy. So that first case explains why 15 million scenarios is important, because this tool will allow you to uncover upsides that already exist in your field, but that traditional tools were not able to test. The second case, also published, is a case in Canada. The operator is Husky Energy. This is public information. You can also find the reference to that paper in our website. This case is different in the sense that the client was willing to invest new wells on the field. So roughly speaking, you had about 69 wells on the field. And the question was, what can we do in order to improve production and reserves? The levers we had were, like the previous case, modifying injection rates and production rates. But in addition to that, the client was ready to invest additional wells. So similar to the previous case, we told them to convert existing wells. In this case, 4 producing wells have been converted into injectors. We told them to modify all the rates of the existing wells, injectors and producers. But in addition to that, we told them to drill 4 additional wells, infill drilling, with, of course, the precise location of the wells and the completion profile as well. So that has been implemented, and again, you see the result on the graph. The increase are the dark green bars, and you see an increase of 69% of the current trend of production, resulting from both modifications of rates and drilling new wells. If you look at the economic KPI, we divided by 8 the capex per barrel. When I say capex per barrel, I mean investment made divided by the additional oil developed by that plan. The third case is a little bit different. We are now talking about a case where the company was bidding to get a block, which was a brownfield with hundreds of wells, and where the plan that they had in mind was a plan where they would invest $100 million US in capex, mainly drilling, and the expected margin was to be in the range of $200 million US. And the rate of return of that drilling campaign was expected to be 20%. So the question to us was, can you improve that reference plan that we have, and can you de-risk our investment campaign that we anticipate to make? So we came with plenty of plans, but the two important ones are on the graph here, on picture. The first column, called upside, is there to evaluate how much upside they would have on the field by investing more wells. The idea being that we could increase the number of wells that they could do, but also be more efficient in the drilling campaign. In other words, to develop additional oil or more oil with the same number of wells. So by playing both levers, increasing the number of wells and increasing the efficiency of the drilling campaign, we showed them that they could indeed increase by investing $300 million instead of $100 million. They could multiply by 5 the expected profits made on the field. And the rate of return of the drilling campaign was going up from 20% up to 30%. So that was used as a case to show that even if they were bidding with the reference plan, they would have an upside when getting the block for the future. At the same time, like any responsible company, the question was, what if the economic conditions would change during the following years? How can we de-risk our plan? And we showed with the second column here that even with an increase of drilling cost and other costs associated with that by 30%, investing the same amount of money, which is $100 million, they could still increase their margin, double it from $200 million to $400 million, and keeping the rate of return on the drilling campaign unchanged. So in other words, it was safe to bid on that block for two reasons. One, because the upside left after the bidding would be significant at the same economic conditions, but also even if economic conditions would worsen in the future, that would remain a good case to bid on. So Scott?
Okay. Thank you. Those are very, very compelling cases, and I love to hear the stories. I'm going to mention some of the criteria for assets that are good candidates for the 4Oil technology. We certainly don't want to leave anybody with the impression that it is all things to all people and it's going to solve every problem in the oil field. However, for assets that are primarily liquids, for assets that have conventional production, which is still 60-odd% of the world's 100 million barrels a day, and for assets that have 10 years, 7 to 10 years or more production history, a good well count so that we can learn from the data and the history. Secondary recovery is generally preferred because it gives us more levers, more degrees of freedom to optimize, as you mentioned in two of the case studies. Those assets will be good assets for the technology. The technology will be limited to providing recommendations for actions that are similar to actions that you have already done. And that's also an important limitation of the technology. So for example, if you've historically been on a water flood and you are looking to maybe do a polymer flood but haven't done it yet, 4Oil will not be able to predict or forecast necessarily the result of the polymer flood. Similarly, if you were looking at an infill drilling campaign, 4Oil would be a very good technology, but if you're looking for significant step-outs outside the envelope from which the technology has already learned from, would not necessarily be the best case. We also like to say that something should be at stake for the operator. There should be a reason that you're doing this that may, if you're just looking for a business as usual and you're declining production, you want to enhance it somewhat, that's an interesting case, but what's more interesting is if the asset is strategic if you have CapEx and investment at stake, there's significant leverage to using the technology. A couple of other considerations. I think we've mentioned that although it's a behavioral model, the client's understanding of the geology will be superior. And also, I think it's important to note we've had in several of our discussions, our clients would say, but our reservoir is really, really complicated. Can a machine learning tool really learn and understand the complexity of our reservoir? And just to be honest, we say a more complex system is going to be a little bit harder for us to model as well. But the upside in terms of understanding and clarifying some of the uncertainties that are in your reservoir model far outweigh any complexity or any additional time it might take to generate the behavioral model. Okay. So we're just about to wrap up. We have a couple of more slides and one more polling question for you. So in your view of how technologies are emerging in our industry, do you believe that digital technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence will play a role in subsurface modeling, or is it really all about the rock and the traditional methods? We'll give you a moment to respond. Looks like the results are starting to come in. Interesting. Interesting. There's a few more still coming in. We'll give it another moment or two. Okay, is that pretty much refreshed? Okay, so it looked like almost 2/3 think that digital technologies will complement subsurface modeling. Nearly 1/3 saying that the impact will be substantial, and a couple of outliers that say, minor impact or virtually no impact. That's a little bit better, I guess I would say, than I would have expected. But it also reflects, I think, what we've seen as we've talked to clients around the world. This notion of using these technologies is emerging. There's sort of this question about how can we apply it to the reservoir, and we're hoping that we can help bridge that gap to be a complement to your existing knowledge and existing technologies, and hopefully, yes, indeed, have a major impact. So that's what we're shooting for as well. Okay, where are we here? Okay, so just a couple of quick slides to wrap up. As we look at subsurface optimization and what we think it can deliver over time, it's essentially significantly more barrels at a lower cost. So with low CapEx scenarios where you're using already involved in a water injection, water flood, gas lift, chemical injection, and so forth, our actions are going to be, as you said, mostly changing injection and production rates, and we can give you significant increase in oil production and, importantly, reserves for very, very low CapEx per barrel cost, significant MPV gains. Again, if you're on a development campaign with infill drilling, FOROIL's patented sweet spot locator can help identify the sweet spots for optimal placement of your new wells and really leverage your existing CapEx plan. Okay. So again, in summary, the digital oil recovery process is quick to set up, fast to run and implement. It's not overly disruptive to your overall workflows. You can develop de-risked and optimized development plans. As we just saw, importantly, complements your existing techniques, helps clarify uncertainties, and generates very robust forecasts. So in short, it provides the opportunity to develop more oil for less dollars, faster, and less risk. Okay. That's the end of the formal presentation. I think we were going to go to some questions and answers. Looks like we've got some questions from the participants.
Good deal. Thank you, Scott, for the informative presentation. We'll now transition to the question and answer portion of our webcast. You can continue to submit your questions in the Q&A box located on the bottom left corner of your screen. Let's start with the first question. How are economics embedded into the optimization?
Okay, so our system is not a software like Eclipse. It means that for each project, we have some developers coding some specific lines for your specific field with your specific issues. And regarding economics, we take on board all the costs and prices of oil related to your case. So we will code the cost of drilling, we will code the cost of operating, we will code the cost of debottlenecking surface equipments, because surface equipments are part of the optimization process. All of that will be coded. We will embed also the fiscal terms if you wish, and we will also, of course, take the price of oil as a given, and all these parameters can vary through time also. And in the end, we will code your specific objective function, the objective that you want to achieve, whether it be net present value, or capex per barrel, or a rate of return of your investments, or a combination of those. Whatever you wish will be optimized.
Next question. What is meant by measured data? Interpreted data is derived from measured data. Does FOROIL use only production rate and pressure data? You can't use Darcy law without incorporating
G&G.
G&G. Yeah, thank you for the question. A very important question. We take all the measured data, so I will make a brief list. We take, as it is said, production data and injection data as well. We take all the pressure measurements made on the field. Can be well throwing pressure, can be wellhead pressure, will be static pressure, all these measurements made on the field as they are. We will also take all the geological measurements made at the wells, at the cores, so porosity, permeability, everything. We will take all the PVT measurements made on the fluids. So all the measured data will be taken as an input, similarly to an Eclipse system. What we will not take as an input are all the interpreted data, like seismic data, and like the geological model that you build yourself from your observation made on the field. All the rest is taken on board. And then, of course, we apply all the laws like Darcy law, which was mentioned in the question.
Next question. Can your method be implemented in optimization of tertiary recovery?
What is it? The answer to the question is yes. Again, it depends on the number of wells and number of years of data that the field has been under that form of recovery. Again, if you think about it as a learning system, it needs a training data set to learn from. And whether that's primary recovery, secondary recovery, or tertiary recovery, the tool can model and then learn from the past behavior.
Next question. How long will it take to get a FOROIL report on a field with 100 wells that's 10 years old, that's already unitized with gas and water injection?
How long will it take to do the job? 3 months. In 3 months, we will set up the model, run our 15 million scenarios, find for each type of strategy that you're interested in the best scenario. What we call a type of strategy is, for instance, no investments, and then 10 million US investment, and then 20 million US investment. So each of these strategies that you define yourself will find you the best plan, and that will take 3 months. After that, we'll go into the plan customization phase, which roughly takes a few weeks, during which you will ask plenty of questions and during which we will refine the plan to make it more practical, taking on board additional constraints that you will have uncovered to us.
Next question. How did you embed reservoir physics into the data?
So the reservoir physics are not embedded in the data, they are embedded in the custom space of solution, which was described in the initial slide that Scott has commented. So in that space of solution, we apply all the physical equations that we all know, the same as you have in any mesh model. And then we use the machine learning to find the best model within that space of candidate models, as Scott has described, to find the best history match.
Next question. Can you apply uncertainty on your allocated production data to determine the impact on the forecast?
Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. Having said that, if you have in mind that a mesh model over 5 years would have typically a plus or minus 50% error or uncertainties attached to each well, our tool typically has an uncertainty divided by 10. So plus or minus 5% at a well level as opposed to plus or minus 50%. So the need for assessing uncertainty is less. Having said that, most clients would require us to do that, and of course we do that.
Next question. What is your minimum number of required parameters you need?
So the minimum number is a combination of how many years the field has been producing. So the rule of thumb is 10 years, but I would say that 20 years is better than 10. And then a number of wells. So again, 10 to 15 wells would be seen as a minimum, but again, 30 wells or 50 wells is better than 10 or 15. So it's a combination of number of years and number of wells, which is the minimum requirement that we need. Prior to starting a job, we will ask some basic information regarding the field in order to test if whether your case is in the scope of our technology or not. That will be prior to any job or any contract signed.
Next question. Do you have a success story for a deep water as well? Compared with unconventional, we don't have many wells or much data available for deep water.
Yes, we have. Having said that, in some cases, you do not have sufficient number of wells. So some cases in the Gulf of Mexico do not have enough wells, or some cases in the North Sea do not have enough wells. But apart from that, if you have the minimum number of wells and minimum number of years of production, the technology applies equally well on deep offshore, offshore, or onshore. No difference.
Next question. How is physics included? Do you actually solve the flow equations?
Yes, we do, and this is made within the space of solution which I commented earlier. So we couple the space of solution with the data and find the best candidate model within that space of solution.
Next question. How reliable is this method on some projects that we do not have data related? What is going to be implemented in the future?
So this is a limitation of what we do. So we have 3 limitations. I mentioned the first 2, which are the number of wells and number of years. And the last one, which Scott has already mentioned, which is we are limiting our recommendation to types of actions that have been already implemented on that particular field in the past. So if you had secondary recovery on your field, we will help you optimize that. But if you did not have EOR on your field, we cannot predict what the behavior will be with EOR unless we have started it in the past. It's basically a machine learning the response of any draining technique on the field. So we need the past to do that.
Next question, how are FDPs generated and provided to the algorithm for optimization?
So that's part of the know-how. By solving the non-uniqueness issue, we've complexified the optimization problem, because the space of solution, which I've mentioned a few times, has not a nice shape in terms of mathematical algorithms that we can apply for optimization. So part of the know-how we've developed through time is to make sure that we cover the vast domain of possibilities that you have in such a way that, having run 15 million scenarios, we are pretty sure not being too far from the absolute optimum. We cannot guarantee that we touch the optimum, because there is no way to do that. But what we are selling is the fact that, A, we covered the vast domain of possibilities, and second, we have significantly increased the outputs of your field compared to your reference case.
Next question, what machine learning techniques are used in behavioral modeling? Are the methods used for geological modeling of reservoirs suitable for behavioral modeling? For example, A and N methods such as MLP may be used for estimating reservoir properties. Can be the same tools be used in behavioral modeling?
No, we're not using those techniques. I would say the principle is to apply optimization algorithms. So we solve in sequence two optimization problems. The first one is to find the best candidate model within a space of solution, which will give you the best history match. There is no difference in principle with what you do in history matching an eclipse model. The difference is that we do that in different space. Once we have found the best model, which incidentally is unique in our case, as opposed to an eclipse system, then we have a given model which will be used to test and calculate and rank 15 million plans. And again, that's going to be a second optimization problem. So we make sure that we cover the vast domain of possibilities and find the best combination of parameters, which in that case are: where should we drill, how should we modify the production rate, injection rates, how much EOR should we inject, and so forth. So that are the levers we are playing with, and therefore the 15 million scenarios we generate and calculate and rank.
Next question, how can the DOR model complement our existing reservoir models?
So our DOR technology is fundamentally a tool to find a better way to produce a given field. So this is based on learning how the field is behaving. This is not there to tell you why it is behaving like this. As a secondary result, it will help you understand your reservoir better. But our primary objective is to generate those 15 million plans and find the best way to produce. So it is complementing your... Sorry?
One more question here. We're just about out of time. What is the margin of uncertainty?
So a typical uncertainty is plus or minus 5% on a well-by-well basis over 5 years, as opposed to plus or minus 50% with the traditional mesh model.
Good deal. That's all the time we have for today. We'd like to thank you all for attending today's webcast. We also want to thank Deloitte and FOROIL for putting together this timely and informative presentation. Finally, an on-demand version of this webcast will be made available in the coming days and will be emailed to everyone. This concludes our presentation.